Some Commodore 64 games weren't just controversial. In Germany, they were hidden. No adverts, no shop shelves, no magazine coverage. If you didn't already know they existed, you weren't meant to find them. And if you did want one, you had to ask for it, unter dem Ladentisch, which basically means under the counter. Now here's why that even existed. In Germany, games weren't just rated, they could be indexed, meaning they were officially classified as harmful to young people. That decision came from a government body, the BPjS, later the BPJM, whose job was to review media under strict youth protection laws. And once something was indexed, it wasn't banned, but it was heavily restricted. It couldn't be advertised, displayed or sold openly. So effectively, it disappeared from public view, and the reasons weren't always obvious. Some games were flagged for violence, others for real World War themes, some for crime, authority, or behaviour regulators felt could influence younger players. And in some cases, it wasn't about violence at all. There were also titles aimed at adult audiences that fell under the same system, handled in exactly the same way, just for very different reasons. And once a game landed on that list, it could stay there for decades. Now, just to be clear, this isn't a list I've made. These were real classifications made at the time under German law. I'm just walking you through some of the games that ended up there, and giving context around why they may have been included, because in a lot of cases the reasoning isn't directly stated, so some of this comes down to interpretation. And looking back now, some of it makes sense, and some of it might feel a bit over the top by today's standards, but that's exactly what makes this interesting. Because this isn't just a list of games, it's a snapshot of what was considered risky, influential, or unacceptable at the time. And a lot of people didn't even know this system existed. What if a game didn't just drop you into a fight, but walked you through an invasion step by step? Beachhead doesn't mess about. Within seconds you're manning naval guns, taking down aircraft, pushing closer to shore, and eventually rolling tanks straight onto land. It's not random action, it's structured. Every stage builds on the last, until you've effectively carried out a full assault, and that's exactly why it raised eyebrows. Because this isn't survival, you're not escaping anything. The entire game is built around progressing through force, advancing because you're destroying what's in front of you. That fits directly into a key BPjS concern. Violence as the objective, not just part of the experience. When a game turns conflict into a step-by-step process you repeat and improve, it starts to feel less like a moment and more like a system. It doesn't ask if you want to invade, it just shows you how to get better at it. And from there, things don't just continue, they get a lot closer to real life. What happens when a game stops being fictional and starts poking at real-world tension? Raid over Moscow puts you right in the middle of Cold War escalation. You're intercepting nuclear strikes, then pushing into Soviet territory to stop the threat at its source. Now that might sound like standard action today, but in 1984 this wasn't distant history, this was current. Governments were still on edge.
We cannot buy our security, our freedom from the threat of the bomb, by committing an immorality so great as saying to 1 billion human beings now enslaved behind the Iron Curtain, give up your dreams of freedom, because to save our own skins we're willing to make a deal with your slave masters.
And suddenly, here's a game turning that situation into something you can play through. That's exactly what caused concern, because this falls into a very specific category. Real-world conflict presented as interactive entertainment, not fantasy, not sci-fi, something recognisable, something people were actively worried about. The game was indexed in Germany in 1985, largely because of that framing. This wasn't a made-up war, it was one people were already imagining. And after that, the next game proves something important. You don't need politics to raise concern, just repetition. This one feels almost relaxing, which makes what you're doing even more noticeable. Blue Max is all about control. You glide low across the landscape, lining up targets with precision. Bridges, buildings, anything below you. There's no rush, no panic, just steady movement and careful bombing. And that's the trick, because nothing changes. There's no shift in tone, no consequence, no narrative framing what you're doing. It's just a loop. Identify, destroy, move on. again and again. That's exactly where BPjS concern comes in. Not because it's extreme, but because it presents violence as normal, repeatable behaviour, completely detached from outcome. When something becomes routine, it becomes easier to accept, and that's what regulators were trying to avoid. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it just keeps asking you to do the same thing. Blue Max wasn't banned for what it showed, it was banned for what authorities believed it was teaching: to obey orders, glorify war, and enjoy destruction. And then the next game proves that sometimes it's not what you're doing that matters, it's where you're doing it. This one isn't controversial because of gameplay, it's because of history. Castle Wolfenstein is actually quite clever. You sneak through a fortress, avoid guards, disguise yourself, and try to escape. For the early 80s it's impressively advanced, but the issue isn't mechanics, it's the setting. You're inside a Nazi stronghold. Uniforms, guards, the whole environment tied to a very specific period in history. And in Germany that comes with strict legal and cultural sensitivity. Even though the game puts you on the opposite side, the act of making that environment interactive was enough to raise concern. This falls into a clear category: use of historically sensitive imagery in an interactive format. And for a long time, that alone was enough to land games on the index. Castle Wolfenstein was indexed for its use of Nazi imagery and World War II setting within a game. And then, after all that context, the next game removes it completely. What if you took away the story and left nothing but the action? Ikari Warriors doesn't explain anything. You're dropped into enemy territory and immediately start moving forward, firing constantly, dealing with whatever appears. There's no break, no change in objective, no moment where it slows down, it just continues, and that's exactly what defines it. Because this falls directly into one of the clearest BPjS concerns: violence as the dominant, repeated activity. When everything else is stripped away, story, context, consequence, what's left is just the act itself, repeated over and over. And that's what regulators focused on, not how it looked, but how it played. Ikari Warriors was indexed in Germany in 1988 largely because it presented relentless, player-controlled military violence as continuous action with no consequences, which authorities believe could condition aggressive behaviour in young players. It was seen as turning constant, consequence-free killing into a player-driven routine, effectively conditioning war as action rather than reality. And from here, things don't get louder, they get more real. What happens when a game stops being inspired by war and starts recreating one people actually live through? Platoon doesn't exaggerate anything. It follows the structure of the film, which itself was based on real Vietnam War experience, and it pushes you through jungle combat, underground tunnels, and full-scale assaults that feel grounded rather than stylized. That's what made it different. Because this isn't a distant fictional setting, it's a recognisable conflict, still within living memory at the time, and the player isn't just watching it unfold, they're actively taking part in it. That falls directly into a key BPjS concern, presenting real-world war as something interactive, especially when it still carries real emotional weight. This wasn't about spectacle, it was about proximity. This isn't a war imagined, it's one people hadn't forgotten yet. And from there, the next game doesn't just show war, it hands you control over how it's carried out. What if the game didn't tell you what to do, and instead asked you how you'd do it? Airborne Ranger begins before the action even starts. You choose your equipment, select your mission, and decide how you want to approach it before parachuting into enemy territory. And once you land, it's entirely on you. You can move carefully, avoid confrontation, or go in directly. But every decision you make shapes the outcome. That's what sets it apart, because now you're not just engaging with conflict, you're also planning and executing it, step by step, inside a realistic military scenario. That aligns directly with BPjS concerns around simulated military behaviour, where the player is effectively rehearsing decisions within a combat environment. You're not following instructions here, you're writing them. And then the next game removes that freedom completely and replaces it with something far more methodical. This looks like a simple attack run until you realise you're running a system. At first glance it's straightforward. You fly a helicopter, destroy targets, and move on. But very quickly, something becomes clear. Those targets matter. Factories produce defences. Defences protect other areas. Leave something too long and the entire map becomes harder to manage. So what you're really doing is choosing what to take out, when to do it, and how to stop things escalating. That's what made it stand out. Because this isn't random destruction, it's organised, repeatable, and deliberate. You're not reacting to the game, you're controlling the pace of what gets removed and when. That falls directly into a BPjS concern around violence presented as a structured objective, where destruction becomes the entire purpose of play. You're not just attacking targets, you're taking something apart piece by piece. And then, just as things start to feel controlled, the next game pulls everything much closer to home. This is where the distance disappears, and suddenly it's all your decision. Death Wish 3 takes place in a city, not a battlefield. You move through streets and buildings as a lone vigilante, choosing where to go and who to deal with. And the game doesn't question you. There's no system pushing back, no consequence built into the loop. You decide what happens, and the game rewards you for carrying it out. That's the key difference, because this falls directly under one of the clearest BPjS concerns: vigilante behaviour, the idea of taking the law into your own hands and resolving situations through force. And here, that isn't just an option, it's the entire structure. You're not reacting to the situation, you're the reason it's happening. And from there, the next game takes that idea of control and moves it to an entirely different level. What if you weren't in the battle at all, but deciding where it happens? Desert Fox puts you in control of Allied forces during World War II, moving across a map and choosing where to engage. Every decision leads to a different encounter. Tanks, ambushes, air attacks, all shaped by where you choose to go, so the action isn't random, it's driven by you, that's what defines it. Because the player isn't just taking part in conflict, they're directing it, choosing when and where engagements happen inside a real historical setting. That aligns directly with BPjS concern around control over military operations, particularly when tied to real-world war. It's not about what you're doing moment to moment, it's about the responsibility behind it. Desert Fox was indexed for putting players directly into real World War II combat. And from here, things don't get bigger, they get more precise. What if instead of pulling the trigger, you were responsible for everything that led up to it? Destroyer puts you in control of a US Navy warship during World War II, not just steering it, but running it. You're switching between radar, sonar, navigation, and weapons, tracking threats above and below the surface at the same time. And here's what makes it different. You can't see everything at once, so every decision matters. Focus on sonar and you might miss incoming aircraft. Focus on weapons and you lose awareness of what's happening around you. That's the point, because this isn't action, it's simulation of command under pressure. And that's exactly where it aligns with BPjS concern. Not because of what you see, but because of what you're doing. You're managing a real military scenario, making decisions that directly lead to conflict. That falls into the category of realistic military simulation, where the player is effectively placed in a position of operational control. Destroyer was indexed because it simulates real World War II naval combat, placing you directly in control of military warfare. And from there, everything becomes much simpler and much harder to ignore. This one doesn't even pretend you're the good guy, it just hands you the role and gets on with it. Express Raider puts you on top of a moving train as a bandit. You fight your way through guards, jump between carriages, then ride alongside on horseback, shooting into the windows as the train speeds forward. There's no twist, no justification, just robbery, repeated over and over. And that's what made it stand out, because unlike the war games, which at least had a backdrop, this is a recognisable crime scenario where the player is directly carrying it out. That fits cleanly into a BPjS concern. Participation in criminal activity as gameplay. You're not stopping anything, you're not preventing it, you are the event. It doesn't blur the line, it removes it completely. Express Raider was indexed for basically letting players directly carry out violent criminal acts. And then the next game takes that clarity and makes the objective impossible to misunderstand. This one doesn't hint at the objective, it spells it out before you even start. Fernandez Must Die is a run-and-gun shooter where you move through enemy territory, destroying bases, vehicles, and anything in your path as you work toward a single target. And that target is right there in the title. There's no ambiguity. Everything you do feeds into one outcome. That's what mattered, because the entire game is structured around locating, advancing, eliminating a named individual. And that aligns directly with BPjS concern around clear, goal-driven violence directed at a specific target. It's not abstract, it's not open-ended, it's focused. When the objective is that direct, there's no interpretation needed. Fernandez Must Die was indexed for centering gameplay entirely around hunting and killing enemies in a realistic combat setting. And after that, things change again. Not in intensity, but in how simple the loop becomes. This one looks stripped back, but that's exactly why it ended up in the same conversation. Falcon Patrol 2 is about as direct as it gets. You fly across a battlefield, shooting down enemy aircraft while managing fuel and avoiding incoming fire. No story, no build-up, no change in objective. Just stay in the air and keep firing. And that's the key, because the entire experience is built around continuous combat with no variation in purpose. That fits squarely into BPjS concern around violence as a repetitive core loop. It doesn't escalate, it doesn't evolve, it just continues. No explanation, no context, just straight back into it every time. Falcon Patrol 2 would only have raised concerns for its constant player-driven shooting of enemy aircraft in a military setting. And then the next game does something completely different, but somehow ends up raising just as many questions. You can usually tell what a game's about within a few seconds. This one tells you before you even load it. Blood and Guts presents itself as a kind of twisted sports competition, a series of events built around throwing, jumping, and competing in exaggerated scenarios. But very quickly, it becomes clear that everything is built around one idea. Not skill, not strategy, just a spectacle of what's happening. And that's where the concern sits, because this isn't about conflict in a structured setting like war. It's about violence presented as entertainment, wrapped in a format that feels playful on the surface. That aligns directly with BPjS concern around trivializing violence through tone, not making it serious, not framing it, just presenting it as something to take part in. Blood and Guts was indexed for presenting repeated player-driven violence as competitive gameplay. And from here, things don't get bigger, they get closer. This all needs to be viewed in the context of the 1980s. Different countries applied very different standards to games, and West Germany in particular had some of the strictest youth protection laws in Europe at the time. The BPjS wasn't reacting to games the way we might today. It was applying contemporary concerns about violence, war, and media influence on younger audiences. What seems mild or even trivial now was, in that period, often treated much more seriously, depending on where you were. If you were around at the time, did this actually affect you? Were there games you couldn't find, or only heard about through magazines or word of mouth? Drop it in the comments. I'd be interested to know what you remember being hidden. This looks like something you'd play on a Saturday morning, and that's exactly what made it questionable. G.I. Joe comes straight from the cartoon. Bright characters, recognisable heroes, vehicles, missions. Everything about it looks like it's aimed at a younger audience. But once you're playing it, that tone shifts quickly. You're driving tanks, flying aircraft, and then suddenly you're in direct combat, taking on enemies face to face, clearing them out one by one as you move forward. And that contrast is what mattered, because this falls into a very specific BPjS concern. Violence presented in a format accessible to younger audiences. It's not how intense it is, it's how it's framed. A familiar brand. colourful presentation, but still built around combat. It looks like a toy advert until you realise what you're actually doing with it. G.I. Joe was indexed for presenting accessible, cartoon-style gameplay built around direct military combat and shooting. And from here, the next game drops the colour completely and makes everything much more personal. This one isn't about war, it's about what happens when two people meet and only one walks away. Highlander is built around one-on-one sword fights based on the film where immortals battle until only one remains, and there's one key detail that defines everything. They don't just lose, they're defeated by decapitation. That's the core concept. Every fight is leading toward that outcome. Now, even though the C64 version is, let's be honest, not exactly a technical masterpiece, the theme is still very clear. This is personal combat with a specific, decisive end. And that aligns directly with BPjS concern around close-range person-to-person violence with a clear outcome. Highlander was indexed for its focus on one-on-one combat, centered around killing opponents, including implied decapitation. There can be only one, and the game doesn't leave much doubt how that happens. And after that, the next game removes the opponent entirely. This one doesn't ask you to fight anything, it just asks how long you can survive the place you're in. Infernal Runner trapped you inside a building filled with hazards, traps, mechanisms and environmental dangers everywhere. Your goal is simple: collect what you need and escape. But that's not what people remembered. What stood out was what happens when you fail. Because the game became known for the variety of ways your character could be taken out by the environment, something quite unusual for the time. And that's where the concern sits. Not combat, not war. Presentation of harm as part of the experience. It's not just that failure happens, it's how it's shown and how often. That aligns with BPjS concerns around how violence is depicted, not just the act itself, but its presentation and emphasis. Infernal Runner was indexed for repeatedly depicting harm through detailed environmental traps and player deaths. You're not fighting enemies, you're trying not to become the example. And from here, things speed up again, and the scale changes completely. This isn't about surviving a mission, it's about driving straight into one. Jackal puts you in control of a small military jeep, heading into enemy territory to rescue prisoners of war. You're moving forward constantly, picking up POWs, fighting through resistance, pushing deeper into hostile ground. And the key detail is this: you're not escaping the conflict, you're entering it deliberately. That's what defines it, because the game is built around aggressive forward movement through a war zone. That aligns with BPjS concern around sustained military violence as gameplay. Not one moment, not one mission, the entire loop. You're not trying to get out, you're trying to get further in. Jackal was indexed for sustained player-driven military combat within a recognisable war setting. And then the next game takes that idea and puts it somewhere much more confined. Really quick one, don't forget to check out the website www.cheekycommodoregamer.co.uk. Now, on to the next one. This time you're not in a war zone, you're walking into a prison that's already out of control. Jailbreak flips the perspective. You're not the prisoner, you're the officer. Your job is to move through a prison riot, rescue the warden and deal with anyone in your way. And the key detail, the enemies are prisoners. Not soldiers, not aliens. People. That's what shifts the tone. Because now the game sits firmly in a real-world scenario. Authority dealing with unrest, using force to move forward. And that's where it aligns with BPjS concern. Use of violence within recognisable real-world situations. Not exaggerated, not abstract, familiar. You're not escaping the situation, you're forcing your way through it. Jailbreak was indexed for depicting the use of force against people within a realistic prison riot scenario. And from here, things don't get bigger, they get more controlled. What if the game didn't just give you power, but let you decide how far to take it. Judge Dredd drops you into Mega City 1, where crimes are constantly happening across the map. You pick one, head over, and deal with it however you choose. And that choice is the key mechanic. You can order suspects to stop, fire a warning shot, or just end it. The game literally gives you those options, and that's what made it stand out. Because this isn't just action, it's authority placed directly in the player's hands, with immediate consequences decided by you.
I am the law!
That aligns directly with the BPjS concern. Use of force without restraint or consequence. You're not being guided, you're not being judged, you are the judgment.
I never broke the law! I am the law!
It's not about stopping crime, it's about how quickly you decide you've dealt with it. Judge Dredd was indexed for allowing players to use force freely as law enforcement, without clear restraint or consequence. And from there, the next game removes that control, and drops you into something far less stable. This time, you're not deciding how to act, you're reacting to a situation that's already out of control. Los Angeles S.W.A.T places you in the middle of city unrest. The screen scrolls forward, people rush towards you, and your job is simple: keep moving and deal with whatever's in front of you. There's no pause, no room to step back, just constant forward movement, and that's what defines it. Because this isn't distant or abstract, it's a recognisable setting, with law enforcement responding to unrest using force. That's where it connects to BPjS concern. Violence within a real-world civil environment. Not war, not fantasy. A situation people could recognise. You're not managing the situation, you're trying to keep up with it. Los Angeles S.W.A.T was indexed for portraying violent law enforcement actions within a recognisable civilian setting. And then the next game removes the environment completely and focuses entirely on the act itself. This doesn't build toward action, it starts there and never lets go. Operation Wolf is a first-person shooter, one of the earliest on the system, where the screen moves automatically and your only job is to aim and fire. Enemies appear constantly, soldiers, vehicles, helicopters, all moving towards you, all needing to be dealt with immediately. And mixed in with that, hostages you're trying not to hit. The entire game is built around one loop: aim, shoot, repeat. And that's exactly why it stood out, because this aligns directly with BPjS concern around sustained, repeated use of firearms as the core mechanic. There's no alternative, no variation in outcome. The interaction is the point. It doesn't just ask if you want to shoot, it assumes you already are. Operation Wolf was indexed for its constant player-driven shooting using firearms as the sole core mechanic. And from there, things don't speed up, they slow down, but don't get any softer. This one doesn't look aggressive, but the objective never changes. Seafox puts you underwater, controlling a submarine beneath passing ships. You line up torpedoes, fire upward, and move on to the next target. It feels calm, measured, but the loop is very clear. Identify targets, eliminate them, repeat. There's no pressure to question it. No shift in tone, and that's what matters, because this fits into BPjS concern around normalization of destructive actions through repetition. It's not intense, it's consistent. You're not in the battle, you're deciding which ships don't make it back. Seafox was indexed for repetitive player-controlled destruction of targets within a military context. And then the next game changes everything. Not through scale, but through behaviour. This one doesn't tell you how to deal with people, it just gives you the option. Mandroid drops you into an open world, tracking down stolen data across a hostile environment. You move between buildings, encounter characters, and decide how to interact with them. And here's where it changes. You're not limited to one approach. You can question people, threaten them, or remove them if they're in the way. That freedom is the defining feature, because now the game isn't just about action, it's about how the player chooses to behave within it. And that aligns directly with BPjS concern, encouraging coercive or aggressive behaviour as a valid option. It's not forced, but it's there. And it works. It's not about finding the answer, it's about how far you're willing to go to get it. Mandroid was indexed for allowing players to use coercion or violence as a direct and effective gameplay option. And even after all that, we're barely scratching the surface because the index didn't just go after one type of game, it kept spotting the same patterns over and over again. You see it in things like Battle Island and Theatre Europe, where suddenly you're not just playing, you're making decisions in scenarios that felt a bit too close to real-world conflict, especially at the time. And that was a big one for the BPjS. When a game stops being fantasy and starts reflecting real political or military tension, that's when it gets uncomfortable. Then you swing over to something like Paratrooper or Shockwave Rider, and it's the complete opposite. No context, no build-up, just immediate action. Drop in, react, fire, repeat. And that's exactly where another concern kicks in, because when violence becomes a constant loop with no context or consequence, it stops feeling like an event and starts feeling like routine. And then there's Gunship and Soldier, where everything leans into control and execution. You're not just reacting anymore, you're making decisions, carrying them out, and doing it again and again. And that's where the line shifts slightly, because now it's not just action, it's simulated behaviour. You're planning, acting, repeating, and that's exactly the kind of thing regulators were wary of. And across all of them, the same thing keeps creeping in. Simple actions repeated endlessly, with absolutely no consequence. Easy to pick up, very hard to put down. And once you notice that, yeah, you can kinda see why Germany raised an eyebrow. Now, before we wrap this up, there are two games I've very deliberately not shown. And trust me, that's not an oversight. Because not everything on the index was about war or violence. Some of it was, let's say, a completely different interpretation of joystick control. Yes, I'm talking about sex games and Stroker. Now, historically, they fall under the exact same system, same indexing logic, same protect young audiences approach, just for very different reasons. But here's the problem. This is YouTube. And if I start showing footage from those, it won't just be those games that are banned. I'll probably be next. Channel gone. Me gone. You'll be watching this as a grainy re-upload titled, "What happened to this guy?" So we're not doing that. We're not showing them. We're definitely not explaining them. We're just acknowledging that at some point in the 80s, someone picked up a joystick, paused for a second, and made a life decision that Germany very quickly stepped in and said, "No, absolutely not. Put that down. Step away." And honestly, fair enough. But that right there tells you everything about how wide this system really was. This wasn't about one type of game being bad, it was about patterns. Things that felt too real, too repetitive, too easy to fall into. Or in some cases, just a bit too much, full stop. And looking back now, a lot of it feels harmless. Some of it you could understand. And a few of them, you load them up, and within seconds think, yeah, alright, I can see exactly why this got flagged. And that's really why I wanted to make this video, because today, none of this really matters anymore. These games aren't hidden. They're not restricted. They're not whispered about under shop counters. They're just part of gaming history. Strange, fascinating, slightly ridiculous history. And honestly, that's what makes it all worth revisiting. If you enjoyed this, give it a like. It really helps the channel. Subscribe for more deep dives into the weird and wonderful world of Commodore 64 and Amiga, and hit the bell so you don't miss what's coming next. I've been the Cheeky Commodore Gamer, and until the next one, bye for now.